In the headlines, the former Barbados Prime Minister Owen Arthur has died. He has been remembered as a passionate fighter for Caribbean integration and a defender of democracy in Guyana. Attorneys argue for the end of constant moves to the court to delay a declaration of the results of the elections. With new guidelines in place, COVID-19 patients who show no symptoms are being released from institutional isolation. And in sport, Amazon Warriors and Knight Riders to clash in CPL 2020 opener in August. With the news, I'm Neil Marks. We're glad you could join us. Mia Mottley, the current Prime Minister of Barbados, has described Owen Arthur as a man who defended Barbados with ferocity and had a burning passion for Caribbean integration. In an address to the nation, she spoke glowingly of his 3 terms in office and how he, 28 years ago, had invited her to join his cabinet as Minister of Education, Youth and Culture, brushing aside those who thought she was too green for the job. Mr. Arthur died on Monday at the age of 70.
Barbados lost today our 5th Prime Minister, Owen Seymour Arthur. Even as I visited Mr. Arthur yesterday, I'm still taken by the quickness of his passing. Indeed, this is one of the few occasions in public life that I struggle for words. While I speak today as Prime Minister of Barbados, and there is so much going through my head after 32 years of relationship, and I might add a sleepless night, my thoughts go back to the morning after September 6, 1994, 28 years ago, when Mr. Arthur called and offered me the Ministry of Education, Youth and Culture, and thereafter offered Liz Thompson the Ministry of Health. We were described as being too green for the task of these large ministries, and that he needed to appoint more seasoned individuals. Owen advised us to ignore those comments and to press ahead with the mission, as he believed we would succeed. He believed in Barbados and in what we could achieve. That reinforcement of what we could do anchored us on a journey for which I shall always be grateful. Owen Arthur, that I knew, was never overwhelmed by the task at hand. Face it and fix it. That was his mantra. Indeed, his greatest domestic legacy will be considered by many as the wrestling of unemployment from the horrendous highs of the early 1990s to under 7% in 2008. It seems like an archaic economic achievement, but it meant real things to real Bajans in real ways. The promise that many doubted at the outset of his tenure was delivered over the 3 terms. The creation of 30,000 jobs. And when it came to our country, Owen defended Barbados with a ferocity that reinforced in many that he understood and accepted that those who went before had set a very high standard for the defense of our country, and that he was duty-bound to continue in the same vein. This strong patriotism was anchored by a burning passion for regional integration and for the Caribbean civilization. This passion fortunately coincided with his responsibility as the lead Prime Minister in CARICOM for the single market and single economy. I was with Owen in Jamaica when he signed in 2006, early 2006, with tremendous pride, the instrument that brought the CARICOM single market into existence. He was brimming with pride. On another front, Owen set out to and did master the art of politics. But he never in so doing compromised his economic training and his commitment at all times to sound policy. It was his hallmark. Owen, from the early 1990s, molded a new class of politician in this country and changed in many ways how those representatives would serve to better meet the changing needs, would serve the better chances and obligations of a politician as they serve their constituents. He worked assiduously in his own St. Peter to make this the new standard for political mobilization and representation for all. And we all followed. I witnessed it firsthand as I managed 4 election campaigns for him, 2 general elections and 2 by-elections. On looking back at the closing years of the last century and the early years of this century, there is no doubt, my friends, that Owen Seymour Arthur was the man for the times.
As tributes continue to pour in, Owen Arthur is being hailed as an eminent statesman who fought passionately for the integration of the Caribbean region and recently in the defense of democracy in Guyana. In this report, we look back at his involvement in the Guyanese elections as head of the Commonwealth Observer Mission. Owen Arthur on March 6th, laughing off the attempts by the de facto Minister of Foreign Affairs to take away his accreditation and that of the others who were invited to observe the electoral process in Guyana. It had become clear that an attempt was being made to rig the elections, and Owen Arthur, who headed the Commonwealth Observer Mission, had begun to speak out against it. When Karen Cummings attempted to lecture him and the other observers, Owen Arthur would have none of it.
Taking our...
I speak on behalf of the Commonwealth, the largest concentration of people in the world. Yes. And I am not going to have, not me, the Commonwealth disrespected by a threat to take away the registration of the Commonwealth. I speak to the Commonwealth. I'm going for it. I'm going to speak to the Commonwealth Secretary General shortly. She's ready to speak to me. And I have a duty to her to report accurately. Absolutely. And I cannot now avoid speaking accurately. Absolutely. I agree. So that if you apologize, because I'm not. Hello. Then you take it away, but give you back.
That's right.
Because good people have never did this me yet.
Once outside the Ashmans building in Georgetown, he again expressed his displeasure at what was happening.
I laughed. Because the minister did not accredit me.
GCOM did?
No, GCOM did. I was invited by the government of Guyana as part of, excuse me, the government of Guyana invited the Commonwealth to send a team. The Commonwealth asked me to chair the team. I have been duly accredited by a government, and therefore I am not going out to comment on whether somebody threatened to stop what they did not create.
After observing what was a free and fair elections, Owen Arthur had spoken about Guyana's place in the Caribbean integration movement.
I just want to say this, that Guyana is a member of CARICOM. And as you're familiar, CARICOM has a charter of civil society. And that charter of civil society commits all Caribbean countries to putting in place all such good practices that could ensure free and fair elections and the operations of a proper parliamentary system. And that if there are any provisions in those recommendations that coming from the Commonwealth that would enable Guyana to even better live up to its commitments under the Charter of Civil Society of CARICOM, then I believe that as a faithful member of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, Guyana should do so because it has a duty to give effect fully to the charter of that civil society that makes it a legitimate and a member of good standing.
As the days, weeks and months went by, other Caribbean leaders spoke out about what was happening in Guyana. When the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, Ralph Gonsalves, said that CARICOM would not stand by and watch the elections in Guyana being stolen, he was castigated by officials of APNU-AFC, notably its campaign manager, Joseph Herman. On June 12th, Owen Arthur wanted his views recorded on how he felt about the attacks on Gonsalves.
The vitriolic attack on other leaders is really, in a way, putting Guyana in a condition where it appears to have itself being led by people who are of order. Mr. Harmon cannot be allowed to indulge his appetite to be attacking leaders if there is an issue at the level of leaders between leaders of the Caribbean and Guyana. Then one would expect that leaders of the Caribbean will have to be spoken to with respect, and that the person who should be qualified to speak to other Caribbean leaders will be the leader of Guyana and not Mr. Joe Harmon.
In a message to mark Owen Arthur's death, the People's Progressive Party described him as an eminent elder statesman and a champion for equal rights and democracy. The party said Guyanese will forever remember Owen Arthur's defense of their right to choose their leaders democratically. In his own statement, the PPP's presidential candidate, Dr. Irfan Ali, said Owen Arthur, to his last breath, represented and stood up for justice, freedom, democracy and fairness in a member state of CARICOM, Guyana. Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness Monday described Arthur as a person who was passionate about his country. Holness said on Twitter, "Today I pause to pay my respects to a man who served Barbados and the Caribbean with distinction." He said Arthur, an economist, was passionate about his country and the dream of regional integration. The Caribbean Community Secretary General Erwin LaRocque said the entire Caribbean community mourns the passing of an ardent regionalist in Owen Arthur. In a message, President David Granger said he was saddened by the death of Owen Arthur and extended condolences to his family. The people of Barbados today launched 3 days of national mourning. Owen Arthur dead at 70. When the newsroom returns, attorneys argue for an end to the constant moves to the court to prevent the declaration of the results of the March 2nd elections. The Guyana Court of Appeal will rule Thursday at 11 in the morning in the case brought before it seeking to throw out the national vote recount and compel the Guyana Elections Commission GCOM to act on the report presented by the Chief Elections Officer, even though parties argue that his report was prepared using the fraudulent vote count in District 4, and it was that fraud that led to the controversy and the national recount to settle the matter. Kim Kai-Thomas, the attorney for GCOM Chair Claudette Singh, urged the court to dismiss the application as being frivolous and vexatious and of no merit. During Saturday's virtual hearing of the Court of Appeal, Kai-Thomas submitted that the Chief Elections Officer must comply with the directions he was given by GCOM to use the results of the national vote recount to prepare a report which would be used to make a declaration. To do otherwise, she said, would be to entertain fraud. And she urged the Court of Appeal to resist this.
Your Honours, when one properly examines what the appellant is asking this Honourable Court to do, and they first started off by asking the High Court to do, is really to ask the judicial system to aid and abet a specific illegality or a series of illegalities which occurred in this nation, which led to the March 13th declaration. They are asking the judicial system to set aside, remove, set aside the recount numbers, the recount results, which, Your Honor, has been hailed by our highest court as a transparent, credible process. But no, the court should set those figures aside, but instead, the court must order GCOM to rely on the March 13 declarations. Those declarations, Your Honor, which led to GCOM exercising its powers in the first place under Article 162 to ensure that they produce a transparent, credible results from the March 2020 election. Your Honours, I ask this Honourable Court not to be used as an instrument of fraud, because when one analyzes what they're asking you to do, that is exactly what the appellant is asking this Honourable Court to do.
Kai-Thomas said that all of the applicants' allegations, contentions and attacks on specific pieces of legislation dealing with elections are to be addressed by an elections petition after the results of the elections are declared. The Attorney General Basil Williams contended that Chief Justice Roxanne George erred in law and misconstrued the provisions of Article 177(2)(b) of the Constitution when she held that the Chief Elections Officer cannot act on his own and is but an employee of GCOM with no constitutional mandate. Article 177(2)(b) states that where there are two or more presidential candidates, the one to whom more votes are cast shall be deemed elected president and shall be so declared by the chairman of the Elections Commission, but acting only after such advice has been tendered to the Elections Commission at a duly summoned meeting. The Attorney General stated that the requirements of Article 177(2)b are mandatory, as the words shall and acting only in accordance with are used, but other attorneys in the case challenged his arguments.
Acting only in accordance with the advice, that too must be given a plain meaning in order to arrive at the true intent of the legislature. The role of the CEO under the Constitution must be seen as separate from the day-to-day administrative functions where he is under the direction and control of the Commission. I repeat myself. The role of the CEO under the Constitution must be seen as separate from his day-to-day administrative functions where he is under the direction and control of the Commission. The promulgation of this specific advisory role to the level of the Constitution must not be viewed as ordinary and taken lightly, as elections are to be seen as being free of interference. Even the interference of the Commission, which are made up of political commissioners. Accordingly, the words acting only in accordance with the advice of the Chief Elections Officer are deliberate and clear and has to be given their true meaning.
What we have is a situation where the CEO has said that he is not going to follow that direction. He's not going to follow Order 60, even though he went through the entire process supervising the recount, even though he gave a report to GCOM of the results of the recount showing that the PPP had won the election. He has decided that he is not following the recount because he has taken the view that the recount is invalid, and therefore he has taken the view, I don't know who's advised him, but he has taken the view that he's going back to the declarations. Now, so that there is an impasse, and we respectfully submit in these circumstances, the High Court does have the jurisdiction to make such orders as may be necessary to resolve that impasse, more particularly to ensure that the elections process is complete.
GCOM is trying to administer the election. They are trying to tell their employee, the chief executive officer, what is required of him and what he should do. It appears that he is unwilling to take the supervision. But, Your Honor, unless we're playing Sesame Street's Word with Friends, what the Attorney General says about the sole advice of the CEO could not mean that he had a unilateral absolute discretion. Otherwise, what would be the purpose of a vote? So he has to act in the basis of information that he has within him. And that information is the data from the recount, which what we understand from the application is what the chairwoman of GCOM has written to him repeatedly to use in making his declarations. Now, that is dealt with in great detail in the court below, Your Honor. We don't wish to repeat that. Essentially what it is Mr. Lowenfield is not a Lone Ranger, and he does not have this absolute discretion.
And on the face of it, on all the evidence before you, and on the binding decision of the CCJ, we know that Mr. Lowenfield is bound by the instructions given to him by GCOM on the 16th of June, and that Mr. Lowenfield acted unlawfully and his advice was set aside when he did not conform to those instructions. And now, for a second time, he has failed unlawfully to conform to those instructions. The learned Chief Justice was eminently equipped to order that the CEO, in order for the smooth process of these elections, and as he had no choice, because it was under the instructions of GCOM, and because those instructions were in writing and are before the court and are undisputed, and because the result of the recount has already been determined by the CCJ to be the applicable count and has been determined by GCOM to be the applicable count, and any challenge to that must be by elections petition. The learned Chief Justice was quite equipped to say that she is issuing an order to Mr. Lowenfield, directing him to produce his advice on the basis of the letter sent to him by GCOM because he has no choice. And that is the crux of the mandatory order. There is no other legal option available to him. He cannot second guess it. He cannot go back as he purports to do and use Mr. Mingo's report. He cannot go back as he purported to do and was set aside and invent his own numbers and disenfranchise 100,000 voters. He is an administrative functionary and has no choice. He got to do maths. And the maths, as instructed to him, are based on the recount numbers.
Attorneys for the respondents in the case argued for the court to take strong action to end the impasse and to get the chief elections officer to comply with the direction he was given. They said too the matters have been heard and determined by the courts many times over, and it needs to stop so that the electoral process could be brought to an end.
The only possible conclusion is that it cannot be said that GCOM is acting unlawfully, because Section 140 prohibits us from inquiring into their deliberation. But what we do know, and the only possible inferences we can draw, is that they were acting entirely correctly, entirely lawfully, when they said to Mr. Lowenfield, your report of 11th July does not conform to our instructions sent to you on the 16th of June, and therefore is unlawful, as was your previous report that was set aside by the CCJ. And therefore, if we treat Ms. Jones' application as bona fide, and we consider the role of the court as acknowledged by Chief Justice George, and as acknowledged in the litany of case law cited by counsel, to smooth this process, the question then arises, how do we deal with this impasse? Now, in my respectful view, and Ms. Kite has said it very clearly, there can't be an impasse with your employee. If you have power to hire and fire, as you do under sections 16, 17, and 18 of the Elections Law Act, and after 2 weeks your employee has failed to do what you tell him to do, the impasse should be very short-lived. He may have collected a salary in June, but shouldn't in July, not after 6 weeks.
Your Honor, this is public interest litigation. Any citizen can bring it, and therefore any citizen is representative of a group or class. Any citizen has brought it in Moore, and any citizen has brought it in David, and now it's any citizen bringing it in Morgan. They are represented by the same attorneys fashioning the same arguments. My colleague, Mr. Khan, pointed out just how much it has gone down that road, and we wish to raise to the court that res judicata issue estoppel must apply. Additionally, we wish to endorse what my friend Mr. Jonas and Mr. Khan has said as it relates to the powers of this court. Guyana's democracy is on its knees, Your Honor. We can't keep doing this. We have to have a resolution, and the resolution respectfully, if we take Section 25 of the High Court Act, along with Section 8 of the Judicial Review Act, as has been adumbrated in detail by my colleague, Mr. Jonas, this court has the power to say to the CEO that you are subject, Section 18 makes you subject to the Commission. The Commission has a power under Article 162 to direct their staff. You have been directed to do something, and you should do as you are directed. And we pray that this court take that step so we do not continuously have to go through these cycles.
This court has to act. It has to act, and it has to act decisively to prevent persistent relitigation of these issues. Or else there would be no end, Your Honors. There would be no end to these elections. In summary, Your Honors, the court should find no difficulty in dismissing the appeal and in upholding the well-reasoned and coherent judgment of Chief Justice George. Unless there are
all of the political parties which contested the March 2nd elections were represented in the case, and Senior Counsel Ralph Ramkaran, who represented Lennox Truman of the Liberty and Justice Party, explained why.
Elections are a matter of high politics, and it is inevitable that in cases concerning elections, politics are going to intrude. Your Honors, Mr. Jeremy seems somewhat befuddled at the number of persons who have entered appearance in this matter. I think there are 11 respondents, and he brought the case against 4. Well, it reflects only that Guyanese have become, and I think it is because of that peculiar electoral history, Guyanese have become very much interested and passionate about defending their democratic rights when they feel that those democratic rights are under challenge, as in this case. And I believe I speak for my colleagues when I say that that is the reason that so many of us have rushed to gather around to defend what we believe are our democratic rights.
Now we tell you, an early morning fire Monday left an Eccles East Bank Demerara family of 5 homeless. The Guyana Fire Service is still investigating the cause of the fire, but the family is claiming it was deliberately set.
A fire which started just after 9 hours in the lower flat of the family's 2-story house in Eccles East Bank, Demerara, destroyed the house and everything inside. The house, owned by Carol Beaton, was recently refurbished and was not insured. Mrs. Beaton lived there with her daughter and grandchildren. The family had been living in the area for over 20 years. The daughter, who is a doctor, said she had just left home for work when she heard about the fire. She said she always checks to ensure no electrical appliance is plugged in when she leaves the house. When the newsroom arrived on the scene, the fire service had already managed to contain the blaze. Dwayne Scotland, divisional officer in charge of operations, spoke with reporters at the scene.
On arrival, we saw the building was engulfed, and we set in and start firefighting operation. Yeah, so we saw the fire, the entire building has been destroyed. Alright. But we're still doing investigation to sort out the cause of the fire.
A neighbor, Ivor Jordan, said he was reading inside his house when he heard a woman screaming, and upon investigation saw thick black smoke emanating from the lower flat.
I was just reading my Bible in the veranda, and I decided to come in now, preparing to go to town. And after here, a woman hollering, I come to my gate now and overlook. Well, look, I really see nothing, but I stick a little while. And when I look, I see black smoke coming from downstairs. And my wife said, man, go, it's George's wife hollering. So when I run now, she was sitting in the yard with the baby, and the other grandchild was at the pipe washing. And they said, man, Ivor, see if we can go and take off the main. But when I go to the door now, downstairs was open, black smoke hit me, and I run it back. And that's how we start to raise the alarm to everybody, and we start to call the fire service.
Reporting for the newsroom, I am Isanella Patwo.
The Ministry of Public Health has begun releasing asymptomatic COVID-19 patients in accordance with the new recommendations released by the World Health Organization. Bibi Katoon has more.
The World Health Organization recently released updated COVID-19 guidelines on discharging positive patients who are not showing any symptoms of the disease. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Shamdir Prasad explained that there are conditions for these patients to be released.
What they are finding is that, asymptomatic people, once they remain so for a period of time, they can be cleared. Some areas we're having problems with getting repeated samples done. So there are new guidelines now issued by WHO, which we're being guided by.
Dr. Prasad said following discharge, the Ministry of Public Health keep in contact with the patients to find out if any symptoms of COVID-19 develop later.
At least they should complete 14 days. Okay, 10 plus 4. All right?
Okay.
The last 4 days must be totally symptom-free. They must have temperature checks in the normal range. They must also have no respiratory symptoms and no other findings. When we discharge them, we do daily follow-up the next 7 days. And then on the 7th day, we do daily follow-up by telephone. On the 7th day, we are also recommending that they have a clinical evaluation, right? In the event that they have any late onset. to also brief them so that they, if at any time any occurrence, unusual occurrence, loss of taste, loss of smell, any lesions, any skin reaction occur, that they immediately make contact with the regional center wherever they are. All right.
In its updated guidelines, the WHO stated that it appears safe to release patients from isolation based on clinical criteria that require a minimum time in isolation of 13 days rather than strictly repeated PCR results. Previously, persons had to be tested negative twice for COVID-19 within 24 hours for them to be released from isolation. There have been instances where asymptomatic persons spent 40 to 100 days in isolation as their PCR test showed positive results. It was pointed out that the strict reliance on PCR confirmation creates other risks, including straining resources and limiting access to health care for new patients with acute disease. WHO in its updated guidelines said it is important to know that patients' symptoms have been resolved for at least 3 days before release from isolation. Guyana recorded over 370 cases of the disease thus far, with over 108 recoveries and 20 deaths. Bibi Katun reporting for the newsroom.
The Regional Health Officer in Region 7, Dr. Edward Sagala, and other officials have denied claims that negligence led to the death of a second person from the town of Bartica. The patient, recorded as the 20th COVID-19 death for the country, died on July 21st. Roger Martindale, 54, died at the Bartica Hospital, where he was admitted on July 19th with respiratory symptoms and had other underlying comorbidities. Family members have stated that Martindale died as a result of negligence and not COVID-19, but the Regional Health Officer in a statement on Monday denied the claim. Dr. Sagala said, while we fully understand the pains and emotions surrounding any death of a loved one, we also wish to point out that accusing the institution of neglect is rather unfortunate, unnecessary, demoralizing, and unhelpful, to say the least, to the hard-working staff who constantly put their own lives and that of their families at risk in the execution of their duties. He explained that Martindale was swabbed on July 20th prior to his death. The results from the samples were given to the doctors in Bartica on July 22nd, after he had died. He said the patient was experiencing respiratory symptoms and had other underlying conditions, making him a very high-risk patient. At no time was he placed with other COVID-19 patients, but was isolated as a suspected case. The family told media operatives that they were not informed in a timely manner of his death or diagnosis. Dr. Sagala said in his statement that the COVID-19 result was received from Georgetown very late in the afternoon of July 22nd, and he said numerous unsuccessful attempts were made by doctors to contact the family during the night, and so they were informed the following day on July 23rd at 10 in the morning. Subsequently, mandatory contact tracing was done, and 2 of the closest family members were tested, but both results came back negative. The Amerindian People's Association has been strident in their efforts to provide support to indigenous communities affected by COVID-19. During a virtual press conference on Monday, the association called for the Ministry of Health to ramp up testing in these communities. Some $29.5 million have been spent so far to provide food and medical supplies to the communities. Isanella Patro has more.
Indigenous communities in regions 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are welcoming support from the Amerindian People's Association, APA, during the COVID-19 health crisis. Over the last few weeks, representatives for the association has been traveling to communities despite the bad weather and terrain to distribute medical and food supplies to these communities. With Santa Rosa Maruca in Region 1 recording a number of cases due to poor testing, the association is calling on the Health Ministry to conduct more testing in the other communities. Executive Director Jean LaRose, during a virtual press conference on Monday, highlighted that letters were sent to the National COVID-19 Task Force for support during this time, but have so far gotten no response. As such, the association redirected $29.5 million from other projects to assist the communities.
But I can't overstress the need. Need in terms of the PPEs, need in terms of sanitization, need in terms of beds, need in terms of quarantine facilities, needs in terms of increased human resources. Santa Rosa started out with very low number of doctors and other medical personnel in the community. Now the number has increased.
The association in its COVID-19 response is also targeting farmers and fishermen. The association at this time have not arrived at a position to identify the full impact on indigenous communities, but noted that immediately the education and health sectors are most affected.
Immediately the impact would be on health, of course, because it's a virus, a pandemic we're dealing with. So immediately the impact would be on health and the ability or the capacity of the various communities throughout Guyana's hinterland to deal with the health issues confronting them. We have seen the case of where all of these communities have been unprepared to face a situation like this. Many of them had no PPE to start with, sanitization supplies they did not have. Basic over-the-counter medication ran out very quickly in some cases, or in some cases they didn't have any to start with.
It was highlighted that the business community has also been tremendous in providing the association with discounts on food supplies and transportation costs for distribution. The executive director further said that mental health must be looked at with some form of urgency during this time.
Many of the families in Santa Rosa that I know who were in isolation or who are in quarantine, husbands, wife, children, teachers, all have some story to tell about being traumatized, mentally traumatized. And I think that aspect of COVID is not being looked at when it comes to the communities.
The association further pleaded that the emergency measures and curfew not be lifted as soon as there are no new reports of COVID-19. In addition to the distribution of food and medical supplies, the association has also been campaigning on the dangerous effects of COVID-19 in the communities. However, some residents are still challenging the efforts and claiming that the virus does not exist. Reporting for the newsroom, I am Isinelo Pato.
Here now is the latest report from the Ministry of Health on Guyana's COVID-19 situation.
The total number of tests done is 5,624. The number of persons tested is 4,416, with 4,027 persons being negative. As of the 27th of July 2020, of the 143 tests done, the number of positive cases is now 389, with 20 COVID-related deaths. The number of active cases in institutional isolation is 188. 34 persons are in institutional quarantine, and 4 persons are in the COVID ICU. To date, 181 persons have recovered. I wish to share with you the situation in the intensive care unit to date. Total number of patients seen, 57. Total numbers of deaths within the ICU, 11. Total number of COVID deaths out of the ICU but at GPHC, 5. Total number of patients transferred, 29. Total number recovered and discharged, 9. Total number of ICU to date, 4. For your information, those discharged from both the ICU and the isolation centers are in accordance with the recent WHO guidelines which Guyana adopted. This ensures that everyone who is discharged is assessed as free of COVID-19. I also wish to share with you the map of Guyana with the updated positive numbers in the 10 administrative regions. As you're aware, our cases continue to climb steadily, especially in the hinterland regions. The new cases for the weekend came from Region 7, 9 cases on Saturday. On Sunday, 4 cases from Region 9 and 6 cases from Region 7. Today, 19 cases are coming from Region 9. We continue to emphasize that there is need for more community action. Village councils, gatekeepers, and prominent members of the community we're asking you to remind those who look up to you, to tell them that we can only keep this transmission down if you stay at home and only leave if there is an urgent need. Always wear a mask when in public. The mask does not belong under your chin or on your forehead. And do not remove it to speak. Practice social distancing. Avoid gatherings of more than 10 persons. We know it's a holiday, but you still have to protect yourself and family. Keep up the practice of washing or sanitizing your hands as often as you can, and change clothes. Take a shower if you are on the street. For fellow Guyanese, you are aware that there is still no cure or vaccine available for this disease. So you have to live with this for a few more months or for as long as the disease persists. Therefore, you have to ensure that these practices become a part of your routine. Let us help Guyana. Stay home, stay safe, save lives.
When the newsroom returns, the financial weather and bridge reports along with sport.